Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're going to be talking about a game I ran based on a franchise from when I was a kid that I loved called V. And depending on who you ask, V stands either for visitors, which is what they called the aliens on this TV show, or it stands for victory. But I don't want to spoil too much just yet. So before we get into the game itself, make sure you smash that like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people without telling them. Ring the bell so you know when we upload more stuff. And most of all, leave us a comment. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but even more so, we just love hearing from you guys. We have a genuinely awesome community here, and I really appreciate you being here. I know there's a million other things you could be doing instead, and you're listening to me. So thank you so much for being here. Okay, so all that said, let's get into it. The prologue to this one takes place in 1983 when a race of aliens arrives on Earth in a fleet of 50 colossal flying saucer shaped motherships, which hover over the major cities around the world. And they finally have first contact with people on top of the roof of the United Nations building in New York City. And they look human, but they have to wear these special glasses to protect their eyes. And they have these really weird voices that are kind of low and sound kind of like robotic. And so they're referred to as the visitors. And they say that they come in peace and that they need some resources that we have on Earth that is like no big deal to let them have it. In exchange, they will kind of pay for these resources by giving us technology. So humanity becomes very excited about this concept of like, oh, we could have starships and warp drives, and they're going to cure cancer and yada yada yada. Awesome stuff. So Charles Xavier of the X-Men, right, who lives in Westchester, New York, he uses his telepathy, and his telepathy is massive. It's very, very powerful. So he uses his powers to sense their true motivation, and he finds out they're lying. In reality, they are reptilian humanoids. That's the big twist. Is kind of like how a Terminator is this skeletal looking robot, right? But then over top of that, they put this synthetic flesh on it. So it looks completely human, right? That's what the aliens are doing. Underneath the fake flesh, they're these uh reptoids, right? Reptilian humanoids. Um, and they have a bunch of goals. So if there are any scientists who threaten to expose them for what they really are, they are literally going to eat them, and then they're going to take one of their guys and they're going to kind of like take some of that scientist's DNA to make the artificial skin covering, right? So that then their guy looks like that guy did, and then they're going to replace him, right? So there's this body snatchers element to the story. And then for that matter, the visitors want to replace everybody in the military so that you can't fight back, everybody in the government so that they control everything, right? And everything in the media because they want to use propaganda and they want you to like them, right? So, and by the way, we saw all of that in the V miniseries on TV back in 1983. We were also, by the way, when we ran this game, we were also pulling a lot from another movie I love called They Live, starring Rowdy Piper. Very cool movie, but a lot of similar themes, right? At any rate, so getting back to the X-Men portion. So Professor X knows who they really are and what they really want. So he sends the X-Men to deal with the aliens, and then that, of course, becomes the body, the major, chunk of the game. So Omnius, who's an original character of ours, I mentioned him very recently on my channel. He substitutes his Omni power for teleportation. So he puts the X-Men on the main ship where Angel, Colossus, Dagger, Dazzler, Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler, Rogue, Storm, and Wolverine, who are the players, engage the visitors in combat. From afar, Professor X reads the minds of the visitors and he tells the X-Men where to go, ultimately guiding them to a broadcast center that they have on the ship. And from there, Storm, who's the current team leader, broadcasts basically it's like security camera footage that they have on their ship of all this stuff that they don't want humanity knowing that they're doing it, right? And the broadcast center on the ship is already tied into the broadcast center of the TV stations and stuff like that. And there's already visitors at these various TV stations. Part of it is they have already eaten, kind of like your local anchorman or whatever, right? And replaced them with, this reptilian doppelganger. But then the other part of it is they're so accepted, right? That like you couldn't literally have these alien soldiers just stationed somewhere and people are going along with it. So when this broadcast signal comes in, they think it's like the alien leader going to give this speech, which by the way is very based on Germany in the 1940s. You know what I mean? So they think it's going to be, more stuff like that. So they just put it on the air, and instead it shows their real faces, like when you get the fake skin ripped off of them and they got green scales underneath. It shows them eating, various mammals, just so on and so forth, right? So humanity is disgusted by what they see. And so the heavy hitters from the superhero community then get involved. And in some cases, like Binary, aka Carol Danvers, um, she's like physically grabbing ships and just pushing them into space. So for now, the visitors seem to have been defeated, and most humans are under the impression that they will never have to deal with them ever again. So that brings us to the main plot. Since plan A didn't work, the aliens switch over to plan B. So instead of coming in these gigantic saucers, they start to send smaller saucers that, instead of floating over major cities, they land in remote areas further away from things like radar and superheroes. So, like New York City, for instance, is where most of the world's superheroes live. So the aliens avoid that like the plague, right? And they quietly kill off figures in the media, the military, politics, and the scientific community and secretly replace them. And during this time, one of these reptoids tries to kill and replace Sebastian Gilberti, who is secretly the ultimate sentinel, who is a being from one of many possible futures named Nimrod. He works on the Sentinel program for the government and is trying to kind of course correct, because his future, which we refer to as the days of future past, had been averted by the X-Men. So because he wants to get us there again, he has ties now to both politics and the military, right? And Nimrod has a gadget which has the neutralize power. So it can get rid of superpowers as long as that superhero comes within range of the gadget's APs of effect. So the reptoids reverse engineer this gadget and then they mass produce it, and they're all wearing one of these things around on their belts. More Reptoids on a different military base also get their hands on one of Magneto's helmets, and they mass produce that as well. So now this is keeping Professor Xavier from detecting them, right? And the way we treat it, by the way, is Professor X, how do I want to put this? It's not like his telepathy is just always on and he's always reading all the minds in the world and stuff like that, right? He has to try. He has to like focus on a person and specifically try to read their mind, is how we run it. So when he doesn't know that they've returned, he's not really scanning for them, if that makes sense, right? And as always, if I say something that doesn't make sense to you, that's totally fine. Just put a question in the comment section and I will clarify whatever I failed to convey. So, their second invasion is working out way better, right? Mostly because unlike the last time, no one even knows they're here this time. So, this becomes a long-term campaign rather than a single adventure. And there are several noteworthy moments. One of the biggest ones that I think you might care about the most is at one point in our sort of X versus V campaign, the visitors abduct Wolverine and manage to put him in a strange chamber that's designed to actually convert a mammal into a reptile. And they hope to make him one of them. And during the process, he meets a woman named Julie Parrish, who they also want to put in one of these conversion chambers. But Julie's boyfriend, Mike Donovan, breaks in with a group of human resistance fighters, and they free Julie and Wolverine before the process can even begin. And then Wolverine does what Wolverine does best. And while the visitors use that Nimrod tech to shut down mutant powers, Wolverine's adamantium still exists, and his metallic bones protect him from laser fire. Not that they can hit someone that agile anyways. I can't remember now what they needed to roll to hit him, but it was like huge. So, they came across almost like stormtroopers when it came to laser fire. At any rate, so Wolverine starts making his way through the visitors, and also thanks to his discriminatory smell/tracking scent, he can tell who's who, right? So he knows if someone is secretly a reptile because they just have that smell, right? And he has no qualms about killing. So he slices up a ton of aliens, and then he basically interrogates, I was going to use the word torture. I guess we'll say interrogates. He interrogates some of the reptoids until they tell him where their bases are. So the X-Men go to secret underground bases that used to be fallout shelters built in the 1960s after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the reptoids are using these as their current bases of operation on Earth. And it is here that the X-Men learned the reptoids are obsessed with hybridization. So they've impregnated several human females, including a girl named Robin Maxwell, who gives birth to twins. There's a baby girl with like a lizard tongue and a baby boy who looks reptilian, but he has blue human-like eyes. And the boy, unfortunately, doesn't live very long due to a certain bacteria that the visitors have no defense against. So Wolverine teams up with the human resistance fighters, and together they use hot air balloons to spread this bacterium, which they refer to as red dust. So reptoids, whether they're disguised as a human or not, start breathing it in and getting sick. So for now, the visitors are forced to get back into their many hidden flying saucers and leave Earth, ending the second invasion. Which brings us to the epilogue, which takes place 1 year after the day that the red dust was deployed. The former members of the resistance have gone their separate ways, as Diana, who is the second in charge of the visitors, is about to be put on trial for war crimes, right? So Science Frontiers, which is the company responsible for mass producing the red dust, they abduct Diana and take her to a secret cabin in the woods outside of Los Angeles, where the company's CEO, Nathan Bates, offers Diana a pill that is an antidote to the red dust in exchange for providing his company with access to alien technology, right? He wants the monopoly on, his company is going to, unleash warp drives and, all this stuff upon the world. At any rate, so Diana overpowers him, forces him to surrender the antidote pill, and then shoots him and escapes. And now her new goal is to take the antidote back to her people so they can reverse engineer it and begin a third invasion. But that's a story for another day. So I loved V when I was younger. And all these years later, I think it still holds up. There are a lot of things I could say about it, like the fact it was inspired by a novel written by Sinclair Lewis called It Can't Happen Here, which was a warning about fascism. Or I could talk about the fact that the Visitor's emblem was intentionally designed to look like an alien version of the logo that the Germans were using during World War II. And the V series also used laser weapons that looked an awful lot like a German Luger. So a lot of it was an allegory for the Axis powers, right? But as a kid, most of that went over my head. And the thing that really grabbed my attention was what we would now refer to as the 1980s retro futuristic aesthetic, right? I mentioned in some of my other videos that my day job is that I'm an art teacher. And so for me, a big part of what made V cool was the costume department, the props, the set design. And I noticed that a lot of the visual cues that we were introduced to in V were then copied in a bunch of other TV shows and toys and stuff like that. So like the first one that jumps out at me is the 80s version of laser tag, which was made by Worlds of Wonder. It looked like it was straight out of V, right? It's also interesting to me that we see certain forms of retrofuturism get a lot of attention. So like an easy example would be steampunk, which was more or less how people in the 1800s imagined the future, right? And to a lesser extent, I've also seen some diesel punk stuff too, which is kind of how people in World War II imagined the future. But I haven't seen hardly any retrofuturism that was based on how people in the 80s saw the future. And the V franchise is just full of that. So for me, going back and rewatching it is like a feast for the eyes. At any rate, I'm being long-winded. The point is, I love V. And so these games for me to run, it was a lot of fun. And I don't know why, but like Wolverine versus V just seemed to hit that sweet spot for us, right? It just seemed like a really good fit. So, anyways, we had a good time playing this. Hopefully, you had a good time hearing about it. If so, as always, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave a comment. From everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.